Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you for your erudite, brilliant, sobering, yet quite pragmatic lecture. You point to a Dantesque inferno here, and we need a very frontal plan of action. Madam Neida.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Jeffrey Sachs, for yet again pushing us to move a little bit in the right direction. Being from the north of Spain, I cannot be more in agreement with the revolution concept. We grow up with that in our DNA. I'm not from Catalonia, I'm from Asturias, but where the real revolutionary positive people is. But anyway, let me maybe focus on these NCDs, because I think we have something very concrete that we can achieve. WHO has approved, so all ministers of health has approved a very powerful resolution on air pollution and health. That was 3-4 years ago. I cannot hide you that it was a very difficult effort, and at the coffee break I can give you more details about it, but we have a very powerful resolution on air pollution and health, where we recognize the 6.5 million, where we recognize the importance on tackling the causes of air pollution. Linking it to climate change was almost impossible for obvious reasons, but we recognize that. The year after that, so last year, we approved a roadmap on the implementation of air pollution. So again, a very, very powerful, and I invite you to have a look at that. It's on the website of WHO. However, the dichotomy and the schizophrenia I was referring before is still there. At the same time, a global plan of action on NCDs was discussed by member states, and then some scientists that maybe are a little bit on the fashion of tackling the medical causes of diseases, they were pushing for these individual behavioral risk factors, which are extremely relevant, no doubt, but there has been a quite strong resistance for incorporating that. So I think this has to be solved, because the NCD's global plan of action is done by the member states, and the Secretariat, means WHO, is saying, I cannot include that because this has been negotiated. So this is where the schizophrenia is, and you scientists participating at the NCD's alliance, working groups, commissions, and all of that, you need to help us to push for that. And the letter to Tedros to scale up the work on air pollution and environmental health will be extremely important. So thank you for that. I'm happy to contribute to this revolution in order for people to not pollute my future and my present.
Jeff, do you have a comment? Maybe you should just. Okay. Professor Hescott.
Jeff, I really enjoyed your comments, but I'd really like to go back to what you started at first when you talked about education. I think one of the greatest problems we have today is we fail to recognize that different people have different values that interprets how they believe and how they educate things. And one of the things we heard here yesterday and even today is if people don't listen, they'll never learn. And I'd ask you to think about that and any comments you might have on, because I can be honest, 90% of the things that you just said I agree with, but the way they were communicated, no one in my community would listen to you. I'd like you to respond to that.
Ram. Capisco. Fauna.
Thank you. Very inspiring. My question as well is on the issue of communication. Your scale of intervention is often at the level of the policymaker, both the urban, the national, or the global policymaker, but there was a point in your list of recommendations at the very end that you didn't discuss. You stopped with billionaires and didn't go on to the point about mobilizing the arts and culture community, which is obviously a very important tool in public communication. So I just wanted to ask you a bit about how to communicate, again, to resistant publics, to the vigilance of your message, which inspires us, but certainly not everyone.
Emilio Salinero.
Yeah, these days we are talking about the responsibility of politicians and large companies, decision makers, but I think also I wonder, this our responsibility, what is our responsibility in terms of scientists? So we are quoting a lot the Laudato Si, but one of the strongest concepts there is ecological conversion. That also should apply to us. So I wonder, what are scientists doing to improve our sustainability, our personal lives? What is your vision on that?
Jeff, do you want to continue to take? Yes. Professor Schanne-Huber.
Maybe I just pause, and the minister was first actually raising his hand. Maybe we give Jeff a chance to respond to these, and or you want to collect them all? Okay. Again, a slightly broader point and a reflection. Maybe you can address it. I mean, my own experiences of advising heads of state, maybe not at the same intensity or level as you did, but it's been quite a while, is a little bit different, but maybe with these, because I was not operating in the United States of America, which is a very singular culture, if you would call that. Sorry. My experience is that people do listen, many do listen and do understand things, but the sustainability revolution, which we both would like to see happen, cannot be engineered top-down, in my view. I mean, of course, you have these powerful associations, organizations, and so on. My experience is that on top of that, of course, everything you had on your list is absolutely crucial. We should go for it. But in the end, it has to emerge as a systemic property based on a paradigm shift among, in particular, the middle class, the educated, the curious, the compassionate people. Maybe just 10 or 15% of the population that brings Pareto's principle to mind, you know, the vital few. And not so few, actually, if you talk about 10 to 20%. And my experience is that without that background dynamics of changing paradigms, creating new narratives, all the powerful people in the world are lost, and the interest of the incumbent industries will always prevail. So just one anecdote to underpin what I said. I mean, Germany was embarking in 2011 on what we call the Energiewende, which is now helping the Chilean government to bring down the cost of photovoltaics and so on. And this happened because of a very strange historical coincidence, because in the 1970s in Germany, a grassroots movement emerged against nuclear power. You can argue about that, but it happened so. And then people were becoming interested in environmental issues at large and so on, and when Fukushima happened in 2011, the German chancellor overnight more or less decided we will have a phase-out plan for nuclear, but honoring our climate targets, which means we have to heavily embark on renewables, because the public mood was there. Without that, it would not have happened, although the majority was there and so on. So I think without this fertile ground, which is created by the public discourse, by the compassionate and curious people. We have no chance to engineer the sustainability revolution.
We have 5, 6 more questions, Jeff. Would you like to keep taking them? Yes, okay. We have Monsignor Marcelo.
A very brief question. I think that we need to have models of good practice. So, Jeff, what could be the country that we can say this go well to show to the other people, look, this is a good model? Thank you.
We have Marcelo Dos.
Okay, thank you, Jeff, for your presentation. I just wanted to make some points as a person that's both at the policy side and from the scientific side. First off, I think one of the first things is, and the key that we saw China do and Chile do, is to start measuring and visualizing the problem, because that's the way that you get people on your side. You can't ignore the problems if you don't measure them, so you need to start with that. Second thing, this is a long-term thinking versus short-term thinking, and you need to know that politicians usually think in short-term, and that's why the SDGs are great, because they allow you and force you to look in long-term. If you look at why WHO doesn't look into the air pollution issue as much, is because you see that, it's like weathermen don't believe in climate change as much, and doctors don't believe in public health issues and epidemiology issues as much, and you need, even though that's changing recently. I just wanted to say that, for example, some of the things that are very important is to show the problem, for example, with market-based solutions. If you look at food labeling, Chile did the food labeling, in which you had the sugar, fatty, and salty foods, and the fact that people don't want to have those labels has shifted, and have soft drinks change their formula, so they actually decrease sugar. Had we tried a sugar tax, maybe we wouldn't have had it. It would have been way more controversial, but the food labeling aspect of it made it that simpler. With green taxes for cars, we have a very expensive green tax for NOx emissions, and that has caused Euro 6 to be adopted earlier than we would want to, and that's another way to do that. So I just want to show you or carbon pricing overall. It's a great way to get politicians to look for revenue. It's progressive in nature. It doesn't hit the poor people as much, and therefore you could convince them to do that, and then they don't have to be aligned with the climate change action, but as long as the price of carbon is there.
Can you make the question briefer, please?
No, it's just a way. How do you get the politicians to be on your side? Just to give them the tools and provide the short-term thinking and long-term thinking. Make it more direct to what their objectives are as politicians. But basically, visualizing and measuring, I think, is the biggest way.
Please be mindful that Kronos eats its children. Time. So, Ulrich Poch.
Very briefly, so first of all, I would like to echo John Schellenhuber in a way, and really I greatly appreciate what you said, and also that we need to target the obstructionists and so on, right? So that's one important element. But on the other hand, I think it's difficult to call for a revolution, and so maybe we should also just dwell on the fact that there is a revolution or a rapid evolution going on, again bringing back this Anthropocene notion so that people realize we are doing a lot, so which way are we going might be easier than invoking a new revolution. And again, also along these lines in arts and culture, there is an amazing uptake of this Anthropocene concept again. So again, I would just advocate in short also to bring the word, for example, into the declaration. Maybe I missed it, but it might be just a nice tool to hop onto something that is already rolling more, but probably it's in it, but I didn't find it so quickly. Anyhow.
Madame Ramanathan.
Thank you for the presentation. I wanted to build on a comment that's been made about the siloed nature, and something that you brought up as well, Jeff, that there tends to be a lot of talk within the echo chamber here, and even within ministries, we've found that the Ministry of Health often doesn't talk with the Ministry of Finance or other ministries. And Minister Carrasco, you brought this up, and how this has been really powerful in Chile. And so I would just be interested, kind of building on this question of how does one bring about transformation within government, and how does one kind of break these silos that happen across ministries in order to get alignment of incentives, alignment of policy, whatever that is.
Professor Lee.
Well, I just want to make a brief comment. Politicians are not that innocent. I think they know quite a bit. What we really need to learn is the political processes. How can we come up with a roadmap to work together, to move from 1 to 2? Thank you.
Professor Fromkin.
Jeff, you've been very forceful these last couple of days in calling out corporate malfeasance, and I appreciate it a lot. It's hard to disagree, and that your identification of structural sin and your call for revolution, I think, are one of the most compelling elements of this meeting. That said, I want to ask you whether frontal combat is the only way to go. Reality seems to suggest that big corporations are around for a while, and if there are ways to work constructively, if there are people to reach out to, that we should be doing that. And if there are good people, and if good things have happened by working with those good people, tell us about that, and how can we build on that?
Virgilio.
Well, thanks, Jeff, again, for a very nice, inspiring speech. I think the discussion is on how to bring about the revolution that Pope Francis calls us to do, right? So it's a question of tactics. And I'd just like to elaborate a little bit further along the lines of Professor Joaquin, and bring in my experiences, my previous experience as State Secretary for Environment and Sustainable Development of the Amazon. I share Jeff's pragmatic approach, but I would say, Jeff, that maybe the key question is how to link this revolution to votes. Because politicians, at the end of the day, they want to have votes. So the question is how to make this linkage between the revolution and the votes. And I think today and yesterday, we have heard a very powerful message, in my opinion, which is to link between air pollution and health and the need for a revolution. I think the case of Chile was excellent yesterday because it showed what Marcelo calls for, which is an example. I think it's a great example. So that is the question that I'd like Jeff to comment on, how to make better use of this message of the linkage between health and votes to make the revolution.
Justin?
Yep. Thanks, Jeff. To your point about mobilizing billionaires or other ultra-wealthy elites, I've been conducting a study of billionaires and the environment for a couple years now, and many are well-educated, obviously, and they likely support a lot of what we've been talking about. So I think, but a lot of them are also involved or even lead companies or in industries that are perpetuating the problems that we've talked about. So I think it's how to reconcile, maybe it's a moral gap between these structures of sin you're talking about and their individual sympathies. So I was kind of wondering if we have time to talk about that. But I think it's their role in that. But I think personally a lot of them are sympathetic and would agree with a lot of what we've said.
Thank you. If there's one person in the galaxy I learned during my years as Jeff's colleague at Harvard, there is one person in the galaxy that can keep 14 questions, rather lengthy questions, in his head and proceed to provide a brilliant synthesis. It is Jeff Sachs. Jeff.
First, let me apologize to non-U.S. politicians, at least some of them. You happen to have a very educated politician that you've been working with. She's very unusual, by the way, both in technical training and in her persona and responsibility. So, but there are many. When I go to Chilean cabinet meetings, it's always an embarrassment. I have done that not with this government, but last time President Bachelet was president, and many times with President Piñera. There are too many PhDs in the cabinet. There's nothing to say. They know better than you on everything. So there are examples like that. We need more of that, of course. The United States is quite different. There are no PhDs in this government, as far as I know. There are probably about 3 PhDs out of the 535 members of Congress. I think there are two scientists out of the 535 members of Congress. It's shocking. The level of illiteracy is shocking. So this is, and in many other places, it's also like that. What to do? Again, I do think that there is a extremely important technical starting point, which is to have a good knowledge of what these issues are. And there, I don't think that there is any place but the responsibility of the international epistemic communities, the societies, and so on. They generally are very cautious in their statements. It's very hard to mobilize meaningful, practical answers, but this is what needs to be done. That's why I think everybody should look at the Sustainable Development Goals, look at the targets, say, that's the target, that's my area. We've got to get organized. Who's doing this? Is it the American Geophysical Union? Is it the American Heart Association? It is the World Cardiologists. In what way? And find entry points. Then I don't think that there is any substitute for planning in government. Long-term, serious planning. And if you happen to have a planning agency in your country, keep it. If you don't have a planning agency, make one. And right now, we're going to find over the next 25 years, this is the strategic advantage of China compared to the United States. This is just going to be that way. China will be able to plan this transition. The United States will not be able to plan this transition. And so that's where I'm putting my bet, actually. The structures, the mindset, and so forth require serious long-term planning right now. The state of California does it in lots of important ways, but the federal government does not do it. And this is why maybe we need a few countries on the North American continent now rather than just 2, 3. So that's another possibility. I find over and over again, to Mitchell's comment, I'm sure that I should find a better way to put this, but the basic problems are not the differences of public understanding. These are not the most important problems, even in the United States, which is supposedly so polarized. I'm looking at the Pew survey, which came out last week, on climate change. Is there solid evidence that the average temperature on Earth has been getting warmer over the past few decades? 74% yes, 23% no. Of that 23%, 10 percentage points say not happening, and the other 13 don't know enough. So if you add don't know enough and yes, warming, that is 87%. I'm sorry, that's 90%. And that's true, that's actually for the 10% of the population that is core conservatives, that's not true. Their 71% say not happening or don't know enough. But for all of the other groups in society, they give a typology of seven groups. There is strong support, generally overwhelming support that it's happening. In America, 20% of Americans believe anything. So I don't think that you really have to fight the last 20%. The point should be to get the 70% to agree, and I wouldn't lose a lot of my effort on fighting the last 20%. The problem is that even when you are 70-30 or 80-20, the political outcome goes the other way. If you look at taxes now, in the same survey, should corporations pay more or less tax? More is about 80%. but it's going to be less under the current proposal. Now, we know why that is. So this comes practically, it requires just a little bit of specificity. Politicians like votes, yes, but they also like money. They like money partly to mobilize votes and partly money, period. And so the corruption is very high in the United States, very high in Brazil, very high in many, many countries. And of course, this is a big problem for us because even when politicians know, the paymasters often are in control. And then our job absolutely is, here's an answer, and to help the public to understand how corrupt the politics. That much is known in America also. There's overwhelming sentiment that our political system is broken, which is unfortunately accurate in this. Ulrich, on your point, we don't need a revolution. What we need is a dramatic acceleration of action. I would call it a revolution. Most of what we're facing right now has the darn problem that we're facing thresholds. And this is, if we were fighting poverty, one could say, okay, it's tragic, but another 10 years, there's been poverty for the last 300,000 years of Homo sapiens sapiens, and there's going to be poverty for another 10 years. I'd hate it, that attitude. But we're dealing with problems that are different, which is another 10 years of neglect on climate change, we reach tipping points. Another 20 years of neglect on biodiversity, we have mass species extinction. We're looking at such profound, irreversible non-linearities that it cannot be, we'll get there eventually, and things are fine, it's more or less okay. We need to take seriously what we teach, which is how dangerous the situation is and how urgent it is. It's a hard mindset to have, by the way, I find. It's a hard mindset to sustain from morning till night because you want to relax sometime during the day. You don't want to be a nervous wreck every day. But I do actually believe what we teach because the people who really know keep telling me it's true. And as hard as that is psychologically to accept, we are failing right now. We're not even close. So that is, I think, where the drama really is how do we tremendously accelerate? In terms of models of good practice, I think this is extremely important. As a general matter, it's clear who the best performers on the planet are, and those are the Scandinavian countries. By every standard, they are in superior performance. Honest government, shared prosperity, lower inequality, faster transition to green economy. And the happiest countries in their self-declaration. So I have no doubt, if I had to say who's really performing well in a complicated world, you'd turn to Sweden, Norway, Denmark as examples. Of course, then immediately one is told all of the exceptionalisms there, so are they really role models? The answer is yes, they are role models to an important extent. They spent 100 years creating a political system that was inclusive and representative, and they get real results out of it. But there are other role models also. China, I believe, is going to become a role model in the next years. It's a very different political framework. It is a very different society. But if you read President Xi Jinping's speech last week to the Party Congress, it's a remarkable document. It's 3 hours, very detailed, and it is absolutely calling for a transformation of China to clean, green, livable. And it puts specifically growth to the side and says we need quality of life and we need happiness. And so it's a speech about happiness of the Chinese people. I think it's real, by the way. From all my experience, I would not say this is fluff. I would say that this is very real. And I think it's a civilizational issue, actually, right now also. It's a competing approach and competing philosophy. And I think there's a lot of merit in it, actually. So I was impressed. I just hope we can rally in the same way with our quite different starting point and different values. On Nitya's question about how governments can work better, again, the well-functioning governments now have an intergovernmental process explicitly. And all the well-functioning governments have under the Prime Minister an intergovernmental group responsible for sustainable development. Sweden, for example, has explicitly designated one minister who oversees an intergovernmental group of ministers. China has the National Development and Reform Commission, the NDRC, and this is, they do extraordinarily detailed planning, and one of their plans is that's going to propel China to the lead on most of the green technologies by the middle of the next decade, and we'll see. I think they're going to get there. But I think that they have explicitly created a rather complex structure of interministerial organization. Indonesia has Bappenas. Malaysia has the Economic Planning Unit. These are structures that are designed specifically to pull different ministries together currently under the SDG rubric. Let me say a word about the arts and culture and public awareness.
Jeff, if you can keep it brief.
Yeah, 1 minute. If you look at the number of people with the largest Twitter following in the world, just as a daily indicator of who's being heard, of the top 10, President Obama's there, and all the rest are singers and performers. So Katy Perry has about 110 million Twitter followers last time I checked. And they are where most eyes of the world are. And a lot of them are interested in engagement. And so one of the most successful innovations of the last 5 years is something called Global Citizens and the Global Citizens Festival. Every September in the week of the General Assembly, 70,000 people come to a New York concert that Stevie Wonder headlines and Rihanna headlines, and it's all about the Sustainable Development Goals for 5 hours. Between every act are the Sustainable Development Goals. Of course, Pope Francis is our greatest band leader in making these ideas heard in the world. We need to find ways to reach the public awareness. This, I think, is absolutely, it's not, I don't mean it contradictory as it might sound. We need the technical side, we need the top-down side, we need the expertise, we need the government engagement, and of course we need the public understanding to the maximum extent possible. All I'm saying about public understanding, by the way, is that most people sense that we need these changes. They're not the big obstacle. This is not dragging the public along. This is fighting powerful interests and not knowing what to do. That's where the strong two issues come in. And on the question of companies, first, there are some wonderful CEOs. Paul Pullman has spent every day of every year in the last 5 years promoting sustainable development. And then one of the nastiest hedge funds went after him to try to make a hostile takeover of Unilever. They batted it off, but it shows the kind of vulnerability that can come. So there are many business leaders who, and especially I find in this country, in Italy, The family-owned businesses are gems because they're just so wonderfully committed to the long term. So Illy and Lavasa and Barilla and many others are absolutely phenomenal in this regard. But these big publicly owned or sometimes nasty privately owned companies like Purdue Pharma or Koch Industries or Cambridge Analytica or others are headed by very nasty, very cynical, very tough people. Those need to be confronted. And one of the things that's interesting about companies like ExxonMobil is they have large rafts of lawyers. And those lawyers need to be kept busy with lawsuits and with shareholder resolutions and with subpoenas, as the New York State Attorney General has done, that exposes the incredible deceit of ExxonMobil over the last 30 years. The most cynical imaginable operations, except for the number of other companies that I mentioned. And those, they're playing us. They're absolutely playing us. And we need to fight back. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jeff.